Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. We are jumping straight into it today because we've got a massive breaking announcement from President Donald Trump that has the potential to completely reshape the Middle East. We're going to cut right through all the noise and look directly at his exact words regarding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. We'll break down exactly what's happening, who's actually at the table, and what this all means for global peace. Okay, let's dive into this. The absolute core piece of information anchoring everything we're looking at today is this exact phrase from President Trump: an agreement has been largely negotiated. You know, in diplomacy, words matter immensely. This specific phrasing, it tells us the heavy lifting is already done. We are not looking at the start of a long drawn-out process here, but rather the very tail end of one. It immediately hooks you because it signals that major, game-changing geopolitical shifts are in their absolute final stages.
So, to understand exactly how we got to that announcement, we need to look at Section 1, the Saturday Oval Office calls, behind closed doors.
The timeline of these events is honestly incredibly tight. Let's walk through this Saturday schedule. Earlier in the day, the real action was happening completely privately, via calls made straight from the Oval Office. During those calls, the actual framework for the agreement was hammered out. And then, boom, rapidly, by late Saturday afternoon, the information transitioned from highly classified private diplomatic channels to a very public sphere. It's just a fascinating, real-time look at the sheer speed of modern statecraft. I mean, the whole shebang unfolded in literally a matter of hours.
Looking a bit closer at how that Saturday started, you have to realize these definitely weren't your lower-level bureaucratic check-ins. The progress of this massive deal is explicitly attributed to direct communication, calls made right from the Oval Office with several Middle East leaders. This tells us for sure that the final push required leader-to-leader, direct engagement to really set the stage for a breakthrough. So during those Oval Office calls, what exactly was on the table? Well, the discussions covered this precise phrase: all things related to a Memorandum of Understanding pertaining to peace. Now, in diplomatic terms, a Memorandum of Understanding, or an MOU, is essentially a formal agreement between two or more parties. It's kind of like the crucial stepping stone that outlines the shared framework right before the final officially binding treaty is signed. That MOU was the specific vehicle driving these massive negotiations forward.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the intentional formatting choice right here. Notice how the word peace is completely capitalized? That is definitely not a typo. It's a massive, deliberate highlighter, focusing everyone's attention away from the boring diplomatic red tape and directly onto the ultimate objective. It signals the overarching goal of this entire diplomatic exercise loud and clear.
So the private calls happen, the framework is set, the focus is established, which brings us to the next section, the Truth Social announcement, going public. By late Saturday afternoon, the silence officially broke. The public was finally made aware of these high-level negotiations via a post on Truth Social. This marks the exact pivot point where that closed-door Oval Office diplomacy suddenly became breaking public news for the rest of the world to digest. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly who is actually sitting at this negotiating table. When the announcement went public, it didn't just speak in vague, sweeping terms. It named the stakeholders. The text explicitly lists the United States, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it also throws in the phrase various other countries. So this tells us we are definitely looking at a multilateral framework. It's not just a simple one-on-one agreement, it's a giant puzzle involving multiple international actors. Okay, so now that we know who's involved and exactly how the news broke, we have to ask the big question. What exactly is the substance of this agreement? Let's get into reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the two main objectives.
The text outlines two absolute heavyweight geopolitical objectives being tackled simultaneously by this memorandum. First up, the negotiations aim to extend a ceasefire in the U.S. war against Iran. Second, they aim to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. These are incredibly significant goals, guys. Extending a ceasefire addresses direct conflict mitigation, obviously, while reopening the Strait of Hormuz addresses a vital global choke point that directly impacts shipping, global energy markets, and ultimately prices around the world for all of us. They are presented side by side as the twin pillars of this entire negotiation. So, the crucial point is understanding the current status of these two massive goals. The statement explicitly says that the United States is in the final stages of negotiations, and that specific phrasing is totally key. It reiterates that the bulk of the hard work is done. They are literally right at the finish line, working through the absolute final hurdles before crossing it.
But, as we all know, being at the finish line is not quite the same as crossing it, is it? Let's move to our final section, awaiting the final details, subject to finalization.
The public announcement concluded with this direct quote: "Final aspects and details of the deal are currently being discussed and will be announced shortly." Now, this functions as a brilliantly calculated cliffhanger. It confirms that largely negotiated status we were talking about earlier, but it introduces a really critical next step. The granular details are actively being debated right now, and the public is basically instructed to sit tight and wait for a subsequent announcement.
Let's look really closely at that caveat for a second. Subject to finalization. Those three words carry immense weight. It means that despite all those Oval Office calls and the huge public announcements, the entire agreement still hinges on this last phase. The success of extending the ceasefire and actually reopening the Strait of Hormuz is conditional. It is entirely dependent on locking down those final tricky details.
Which leaves us right exactly here. We've traced the events from those private Oval Office calls on Saturday morning straight to the late afternoon Truth Social post. We know the key players, the US, Iran, and other countries, and we know the massive twin goals of a ceasefire extension and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But because the agreement remains subject to finalization, it naturally leaves us with one provocative thought to chew on. What will the final details actually reveal? When that next announcement finally drops, what specific compromises and frameworks will manage to cross the finish line? Keep a close eye out, because the news promises that information is coming shortly. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the details.